No. No, I'm not going to be disrespectful, but I have questions.
All right, ready? Hey there, everybody.
Hey,
We're
Tony.
here at SunDance Marine in Jensen Beach for our monthly fishing seminar. We've got a special guest with us tonight, not including the infamous Sam. So,
Oh, I'm old
how you
story
doing today,
now.
Sam? You been fishing and hunting and doing all that good stuff?
Oh, yeah, I've been hunting. I went to Canada, and we had a real good waterfowl season up there.
Awesome.
We smacked them pretty good. Had the opportunity to see some swans, and sandhill cranes, and moose, and elk. And, but Canada's a great country, but it's just so hard to get in and out of there. All the COVID restrictions and stuff, it was really, really tough. But it's been good. Huh?
Glad you made it back.
Me too, man. Me too. I was missing my dogs.
Well, before I go to our guests tonight, I just want to say we were at the boat show in Fort Lauderdale.
Yes, I was there.
We had a good crowd in here tonight, and we were in Fort Lauderdale for the boat show. We had an awesome show, and we do have a few boats left over, and we've got some new boats coming in. So if you're interested in coming to see us, I'll give you a little overview at the end of the show here. And without further
Wait a minute, I got one thing I want to say about the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show. That's the biggest boat show in the world. And it's right here within 50 miles, 60 miles of us.
Well, we got the Stewart Show coming up. It's a good show. In January.
No.
Yeah, well, they can't get.
But if you've never been to the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show, you need to go there because that's the only place you will find that much knowledge and that many different types of boats under one roof,
Well, that's true, but Miami's also runs a close second, I think.
I think there's more fishing in Miami than there is in Fort Lauderdale, but I don't know. I like the atmosphere at the Fort Lauderdale show a lot, more so than Miami. I don't dislike Miami, don't get me wrong.
We had a good show, so we sold some big boats and had one of our best shows. So
good.
We're back, we're at it, and we got a great sales team here. So we have a guest, as I mentioned, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission. Derek Cox is here, and he's going to do a presentation for us tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, you don't beat him up too bad. I know you got some questions for him.
I got some questions.
So
but
now he's not.
They're not going to be hard to answer.
You're not carrying a badge and a gun. You're on the other side of things. So,
he can't issue warrants just in case.
He's got his backup out there. I saw him. They're in the parking lot. So
don't tell me that. I checked it out before I got out of the truck.
All right. Well, I'm going to let Derek go ahead and start. Derek Cox is here, and he's brought some information for everybody that's here at the store. And if you want to grab something, you can. We'll have a little talk afterwards as well, but we're going to let him do a presentation on the screen behind us. Anybody out there that has questions, feel free to type them in on Facebook, and you can also reach out to us later on if you see this after the fact. And I'm going to give you Derek's email address before we finish up. So, Derek?
Derek.
Here. It's all good. Everyone can hear me, see me. All right, so thanks for that introduction. Happy to be here with y'all. Today is going to kind of be just a little bit about FWC in general, kind of the way it operates, and then a little bit about my position with Marine Fisheries Management and kind of how fisheries management generally works. A lot of it you're probably already going to be familiar with, but hopefully some stuff is going to be new for you. And then we'll touch at the end on some kind of local issues that are going on, and then have time to get into some questions and some more details about certain things that I'm sure you guys are interested in. So excuse parts that you are already aware of. Just not sure that everyone's at the same point when we go to these sort of things, but feel free to, it's going to be real casual. Feel free to interrupt me if there's a question. Otherwise, we can come back to it at the end. I'm happy to go back through other slides or anything like that, and to talk about any issues you guys have or questions you have on anything. All right, so just a little bit of my background. I grew up in Florida in Orlando, went to UF and got into biology. Started working with alligators and some of their gut contents, looking at kind of ecology of different lakes and wetlands. While I was there, I also started getting into the marine biology and that's where I kind of started that career trajectory, I guess, going towards the marine world. Went up to Alabama for a little bit to work at a marine lab there, where I did some larval fish ecology and got into sargassum ecology, seaweed out there. This was right around the time of the oil spill, so they were real interested in looking at the impacts of that, surface oil on the sargassum ecology, where a lot of your billfish and game fish originate and live as juveniles. And so that was pretty interesting and brought me down here to South Florida, excuse me, where I worked on my master's at FAU, looking at some of the fish and ecological associations that take place in the sargassum communities, and ultimately ended up working for FWC when I finished up. I was at the Tequesta lab down the road. They do a lot of work here. If any of you know Jim Whittington or Eric Alt, they've got a lot of projects going on in the St. Lucie and north and south of there. But things like tagging cobia, it's tagged snook for a long time. Some Goliath grouper tagging projects. A lot of acoustic telemetry work. So a lot of neat things that are going on in the area, and potentially some of you all have worked with them before or may have a chance in the future. And so I like to start off with some of these with just kind of this I'm sorry if you can't see
That's
very
okay.
well.
Don't worry about it, son. You step up there.
Just this kind of organizational chart. It's not super important that you can read all of it. I know it's kind of small, but a lot of folks don't realize that FWC is more than just folks carrying a badge. There's a lot of biologists, a lot of computer scientists, a lot of administrative folks that ultimately put together FWC. And so we got kind of the different columns here. I'm just going to real quickly go through the headers there. Our law enforcement is the one you guys probably see the most often and deal with the most often, so that's definitely a major arm of FWC. We've got our Division of Marine Fisheries Management, which is where I work, and that's going to be dealing with kind of the rules and regulations for marine fisheries. Similar with freshwater fisheries management, we have our hunting and game management. Again, same idea, but with kind of the hunting and game. Habitat and species conservation has a lot of different things going on within it. Things like restoration projects, imperiled wildlife, panthers, things like that, invasive species. A lot of the kind of things that don't fit under those other categories get lumped in with our Habitat and Species Conservation group. And then we've got our Wildlife Research Institute, which is some of the folks you may see out there in the water pulling nets, and some of the folks that are taking samples, the folks that are at docks maybe interviewing you. A lot of that's kind of our main research wing of FWC. So separate from the management group, but that we worked very closely with. And so just kind of like to put that up there just to let folks know that there's a lot of working pieces involved in FWC, even if law enforcement is kind of the first ones that come to mind. And so with the Division of Marine Fisheries Management, I'm going to kind of focus the talk on that today, since that's pretty much what I know about. And so really our mission overall is to sustain the long-term health and abundance of Florida's marine fisheries. And so we want to provide these sustained benefits for y'all and for future generations. There's a lot of culture and tradition throughout Florida with these fisheries, and we'd like to continue that, but in a sustainable manner. And so we want to make sure that we're also benefiting the diversity of stakeholders that are out there. So not everyone has the same idea of what they want to see out of a fishery. And so we're trying to accommodate for as many of those perspectives as we can, while also keeping this health of the fishery as our top priority. And so benefiting both stakeholders and the resources is kind of our ultimate goal here. And so Division of Marine Fisheries Management is actually really small. It's one of the smallest, if not the smallest division in FWC. We've only got about 35 employees. It fluctuates a little bit year to year, but right around there. And only one in Southeast Florida, and that's me. And so we've got a fair bit of folks in Tallahassee, and then some other folks spread throughout the state, some in St. Pete, where our Wildlife Research Institute is based. But as far as being located throughout the state, there's really not that many. They're really kind of focused in Tallahassee. Sorry, jumped the gun there. But we've got three sections: analysis and rulemaking, which is the section I belong to, and does, as the name implies, does some analysis and comes up with the potential rulemaking to present to the commissioners. Our federal fisheries group, they work hand in hand with the federal councils to help provide information, get feedback on federal items that definitely impact a lot of our stakeholders here. And then our Fisheries Services, which is a lot of the catch-all for other things, things like trap retrieval, outreach and education, permitting, artificial reefs, official comment letters, things like that, all kind of are housed in that Fisheries Service. We manage over 500 native species of saltwater fish here and over 3,000 artificial reefs throughout the state. And so with analysis and rulemaking, like the name implies, we kind of come up with these rules that are trying to address any issues or concerns that we have for state waters. For federal waters, sometimes that gets extended into federal waters if there's a state issue that is not being federally managed and we feel that it's important to extend state waters regulations into federal. Sometimes that'll happen, but our focus really is on state waters. We coordinate with marine stakeholders. That's your recreational, commercial folks, but it's also other it's environmentalists, it's divers, it's marine industry. A lot of other folks have a stake in marine fisheries beyond those that are just either catching, releasing, or harvesting.
Is there a clear boundary for state and federal? Is it 3 miles, or is it
Yes,
does that move anywhere? Or?
It doesn't move in general. It's 3 miles on the Atlantic coast, 9 miles on the Gulf Coast.
And that's everywhere.
For Florida,
For Florida.
I think it's everywhere. I think the Gulf is all 9 miles, and the Atlantic coast of the U.S. is all 3, but I'm not positive. I know for Florida it is.
So there's no overlap, other than, like you said.
There are some extensions into federal waters, but as far as state and federal, it's very discrete which ones are which. But certain areas, like in Keys, there's certain overlapping jurisdictions I'll get into. I've got a little map in a minute, but sometimes it gets a little more complicated, and there's more kind of working together to figure out a solution you're both comfortable with. And so we also conduct public workshops and do outreach and education on a local level as well as statewide. And then ultimately we provide recommendations to our commissioners who make all the actual decisions for what gets passed regulatory-wise and otherwise. And so I'm a regional biologist for our Marine Fisheries Management, Analysis and Rulemaking section, so I am really kind of a boots on the ground for the region that I belong to, which is roughly Fort Pierce, maybe Vero Beach, down to about Miami Homestead area. So that kind of stretch of coast is kind of my region. And so I, involved with, groups like this down there, fishing clubs, commercial and recreational anglers, guides, researchers, local government, federal groups that are down here, and trying to kind of piece all that together and funnel that information up to the folks in Tallahassee that are making more of the actual decisions on what's going on. But because they're up there, it helps having someone kind of on the ground and that can handle more of the day-to-day stuff in the area and let them know when there's something that needs to be approved or get their feedback on or anything like that. And so a lot of work with local stakeholders such as yourselves, meetings, workshops, outreach, things like boat shows we'll go to a lot of times, although not recently, unfortunately. We've been fairly limited with COVID for the past year in what we were able to do. However, now it's starting to get a little better, and so we're able to go out and interact with the public more, which has been good. I actually started my position right maybe 2 months before COVID started, so I didn't really get a chance to get out there and meet a lot of folks until recently, which has been unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. So working on that now, and we also are doing some of the rulemaking process, getting specific feedback on rulemaking from folks in our area. Every area potentially feels different about how regulations are going to impact them, and so providing our region's perspective to commissioners and to Tallahassee staff, and then also working with other NGOs and government agencies in the area. This is a map of these are our administrative regions, which you'll notice don't quite line up with the region I just told you. So, my region is really kind of just kind of the southeast portion of that. We have, the blue dots are other regional staff. So one in the Keys, one over towards kind of Fort Myers there, Tampa, and kind of one sprinkled throughout, and then obviously folks in Tallahassee. And so I'm located at the regional office in West Palm, live in Jupiter, but worked up in Tequesta, but worked in Stewart for a fair bit prior to working with the transferring to the Marine Fisheries Management. Yeah.
I hate to interrupt you, but
Not a problem.
that is a hell of a territory.
It-
Do you feel like you can cover that much ground? How many people work for you?
No people work for me.
You're all by yourself.
I'm the only person in Marine
From
Fisheries
Fort
Management.
Pierce to Miami.
Yeah, so it is a lot, and actually it's something that we're trying to get better able to cover our areas. And there used to be there were two people, one for the whole East Coast, one for the whole West Coast, and so recently they've added some positions. The person in Titusville is fairly recent. Fort Myers is just maybe 2 years ago. The Northwest about 3 years ago got a new position. So they've started creating more of these regional biologist positions because before it was just impossible.
And that much territory, the fishery changes so much from like Fort Pierce to Homestead. I mean,
Yeah.
good God, it's like a whole different ball game when you get down there.
Very
I
much
won't interrupt
is.
you anymore.
No, that's perfectly fine. Very much is, you've got the Southern IRL, then you've got the, Jupiter Inlet, and you've got Lake Worth Lagoon, and you've got, anything south of West Palm where there's not really a lot inshore. It's pretty much only offshore until you get to Biscayne Bay, and then that's a whole nother
Yeah.
thing. And so there's a lot of different areas, a lot of different perspectives and types of fisheries.
Are you freshwater too?
No, just marine.
Just marine.
Yeah, we've got a freshwater group that operates a little differently than marine fisheries. They've got a lot more folks in this area, but they do management very differently too. A lot of their management is on a individual lake scale, because their fish, are restricted for the most part to where they can go, whereas ours can move a lot, as y'all know. And so their management and their research are a little different than the way the marine fisheries side has it set up. And so on this map, we're up here, and we've got our Tequesta Lab is one of our fish biology research groups located there that do a lot of research in the area. There are scientists that are answering different questions, and also doing some of the fisheries independent monitoring that you might see out there with pulling nets or driving FWC boats and maybe doing some diving or tagging of fish, things like that. And so this is kind of a recap, but just kind of a lot of my role here is to kind of connect these dots. So getting all those stakeholders that are involved and interested in different topics of marine fisheries and kind of, helping them talk to each other, gaining their perspectives and opinions and feeding that to the appropriate groups, things like that. So kind of getting into being, kind of a networking essentially and relaying information is a lot of what I do. And so you guys probably know this, but just to throw it on there because we have to. Why do we even manage marine fisheries? And so they're obviously very important economically for the state. A lot of tourism ties, especially in Florida, for our marine fisheries. It's also a cultural identity. A lot of people can trace back their fishing heritage generations in the state, and it's a way of life essentially. It's not just something they do for fun. It's also a good way to be exposed and become a good, steward of the environment. If you expose people young, get kids involved and have them gain appreciation for our natural resources, they're going to want to take care of them better as they get older. And really, helping to put that public trust and responsibility that we are trying to do this for the public, for the stakeholders, to make this resource available and to keep it sustainable for future generations. But there are a lot of challenges, especially in South Florida. We've got, the state in general, we've got a very quickly increasing population, a lot of development going on. And it used to be, that the ocean was thought to be limitless. You could never catch all the fish in the ocean, no matter how hard you tried. And we, pretty quickly realized that was not the case. It's also challenging because it's not like, deer, we can go out and count them fairly easily, or trees or something that's stationary and easy to see. It's moving, it's underwater, you can't just put a tracker on most things. Especially, GPS works great for a lot of terrestrial animals, but GPS only works for, marine animals that hit the surface and can have that connection with satellites. So you have a lot of challenges that are unique to the marine environment and marine fisheries. There's also a very large scale. So sometimes this is a very small thing. It's just this one little area, this inlet that you are concerned about. But other times it's an entire coast-wide stock that is all interplaying. If you look at like mahi or something, it's not like you can just fix it in one spot and it's going to fix everything. It's they're moving, and it's a giant stock that has to be managed on a larger scale than just Southeast Florida. The diversity of satisfaction for what people want out of the fishery. Do they want to just catch and release? Do they want to harvest? Do they want to make a living off of it? There's a lot of different perspectives, and trying to accommodate those is sometimes a challenge. Sometimes it's easy, and that's nice, when everyone kind of agrees this is what we should do. But more often than not, it's a little bit of a challenge to try and keep everyone happy and also preserve the fishery. We've also got multiple modes of participation. Some folks have boats. Some folks fish the beach. Some folks just do piers or jetties. Some do a mix of all of them. So trying to keep all these different modes of access in mind and keep them available and accessible. And then the last one is recreational and commercial component of these. That's often seen by anglers as kind of a clash, recreational versus commercial. But a lot of times, there's common ground for sure to be found, and ultimately they both want the same thing, and that's to have this resource be available. And so we've got a lot of licensed anglers here in Florida, leading the nation in that. Also in visiting anglers from both national and international visitors. A lot of folks come to Florida to fish, fishing capital of the world. A very high number of boat owners, especially recently. It's kind of been going through the roof, as I'm sure a lot of you know. Boats have been selling too fast almost, it seems like, for at least I hear difficulties with folks getting certain parts or boats or whatever it may be, and it's just becoming more and more popular. And with that, you have more people trying to utilize the same finite resource, and ultimately it has to be split further, so that we can all enjoy it, and we have to come up with kind of compromises that we can share this resource and not just give it to one group or one set of individuals. We've got year-round fishing here too, which is very different from a lot of areas. It's some areas they just have kind of the summer is their fishing season, and after that it kind of slows down and there's not much action. But here, as you all know, there's a different different fishery every season going. Some of them you can get year-round, and so it just adds to another challenge that we have here with marine fisheries management in Florida. We are the only state in the nation that sits on two federal councils, the Gulf and the South Atlantic, and then two interstate commissions, the Atlantic States Commission and the Gulf States Commission. This is just kind of a cool little picture. We have all these different species that we're managing throughout the whole state, and obviously it gets complex and difficult, but that's where we rely on y'all that are out there every day to kind of tell us what you're seeing and provide a lot of that, boots on the ground information, because a lot of times that's the way that we first hear about things. There's a delay in research for sure, and that's one of the downsides to it, is that a lot of times you don't see the results of research for sometimes years. But if you're out there every day, you're seeing, keeping logs of catches, and you're seeing those certain trends, then then you can be providing just faster feedback on what's going on out there. Excuse me 1 second. All right, so we talked about this a minute, but there's lots of different regions going on and lots of different types of, different types of fishing, types of fisheries, stakeholders throughout different areas. And we're trying to kind of manage to keep everyone happy and keep the fisheries happy as well. A lot of times, traditionally, fisheries management has been done on a large scale, whether it's the entire state or an entire coast. But more recently, there's been a push to do it on a more regional scale. So certain things, like sea trout, you'll have multiple regions with different regulations now. And that's typically been at stakeholder request, because they do vary from area to area, and the request was that regulations potentially should too. And so that's something that we're exploring and starting to get into more with different fisheries, trying to manage on a smaller scale if possible, but it also makes assessment difficult because these assessments that we do are typically, the way we collect data is typically to assess on a large scale, on a coast-wide or statewide basis, and so it can be difficult to scale that down. Let's see, biological differences. Sorry, we good?
So we have I have a question.
Can you read that or I can read it?
There's three questions. Why the disparity between recreational and commercial?
And then how has his division taken our lobby on the St. Lucie discharge issue?
Yeah, are you part of that? That's
I've been involved in some of those conversations. To address the first part about why the disparity, it's not all the time. It's definitely not something that we like to see happen, but it happens fairly often where recreational folks blame the commercial folks for a fisheries issue, or commercial folks blame the recreational, and they're all fighting for the same resource essentially, and think that they should have preference or priority over it, and so it just ends up leading to kind of clashes for how we should manage it. What some things that have quotas, whether what portion of the fishery should commercial be eligible for versus recreational. And then, I'm sorry, I forgot the second part.
the St. Lucie discharges. You guys
So-
involved in that?
Yes, we have. I've been involved peripherally. We have a lot
What
of
does that
folks
mean, peripheral?
come on the edge of things. So I've been sitting through some of the meetings and providing kind of a marine fisheries perspective. But really, a lot of the nonprofits have been saying, their pieces for this area and representing it well, as far as minimizing discharges from LACO, sending water south, those kind of things that FWC has supported. And so those processes, if you've been keeping track, are kind of coming to a culmination here as they come up with the latest procedural manual for Lake Okeechobee, when they're going to be doing releases and how often. And so they're still doing final tweaks, but I think on the 16th is the final announcement for what their preferred procedural, I can't remember the name of it, what it's called, the number operation that they chose, or alternative.
I think it was the acronym LOSOM, L-O-S-O-M.
Lake Okeechobee Systems Operation Manual. That's what they're coming up with. It used to be called LORS 08, Lake Okeechobee Regulatory Schedule, but now they're coming up with a new one. It's been 12 years or whatever, and so they're tweaking things to make adjustments. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Has anyone taken a sample of Lake Okeechobee? Is not the problem. It's part of the problem. But the problem is agriculture and housing. By the time it runs through all the septic tanks between here and Lake Okeechobee, and it runs through all those dairies between here and Lake Okeechobee, where the cow poop is everywhere. I mean, it's this deep on the cows, and nobody wants to address those two things because of the lobbyists in the state legislature. The agricultural lobbyists are the biggest.
So there are things being done on the water quality scale. Just today, Governor DeSantis announced, a higher than ever budget for water quality restoration initiatives.
But I feel like Governor DeSantis is the only one, even Brian Mast, are the only ones that are on our side, because it's not rocket science.
Well, there's a lot of folks, I would say, that are on your side. It's just a large, expensive, time-consuming thing like Everglades.
How expensive?
I don't
More
know.
than shooting a man to the moon?
Wait, wait.
It don't mean shit. Excuse me.
There's a lot of
I'm
folks
not
working on
questioning
it, a
your
lot of
opinion.
money going on to it. Everglades have been trying to be restored for a decade, 2 decades now. We're making progress. There's a lot of all the agencies, essentially, Water Management District, DEP, FWC, Army Corps of Engineers, are all involved in that. It's unfortunately not just a simple fix. Ideally, and if we could snap our fingers, it would be. But it's going to take a lot of time and money, and there's honestly disagreements with how it should be done potentially. Yeah.
Wouldn't you say it's the man with the biggest pocketbook?
I wouldn't say that, no, but it's, funds are definitely an issue with the projects that we can do. A lot of them are very expensive to undertake, and so
Is it funds or lobbyist dollars?
that's probably above my pay grade for those folks that are talking about it. I like to think it's funds.
Do you ever see the St. Lucie River getting cleaned up?
How do you mean?
Well, in the future, I mean, right now,
The-
it's so, you can hardly fish there to catch.
So the plans that they're talking about for Lake Okeechobee are going to significantly reduce whatever they decide on. It's going to be better for St. Lucie than it was before. You know, whether it's this much better or only this much better, that's kind of what they're figuring out now. Because, you know, if you make it better for one area, you typically make it worse for another. And so, you know, folks in Caloosahatchee maybe were upset about how nice the treatment maybe St. Lucie was getting, whereas folks in the Everglades were saying, you know, we want more water, send more to us. Why are you even sending it to any estuary? And so there's a little bit of a struggle there because people want different things. But ultimately, we all kind of have the same goal, and I think the same end place that we want to be at. It's just at this step, you know, where exactly is this step that we're taking towards that goal?
Yeah.
And I'm, like I said, only peripherally involved in that. But FWC has folks that's their role is to provide, you know, be very involved in Everglades restoration, Lake Okeechobee work, and to provide the research and the feedback as far as what is going on there, and to lobby for funding for projects. You know, we have folks in Tallahassee that lobby for funding from the legislature for different projects, and so there's a lot going on. I don't have a great understanding of all of it, and definitely would take too long to go through it than I can get to here. But I can, you know, provide you guys with a link that can maybe have, you know, a rundown of all the things going on, and if there's things that you know, think aren't being done that should be, definitely comment on those. What it can be to me, and I can direct it to whoever it should go to, or I can, you know, hook you up with the people to talk to, depending on what sort of things you want to see.
I just wondered what the dollars, how you compare the dollars between the Florida is the biggest fishing state in the world. I mean, we have more fishermen here than any state in the United States. Where does our dollars come into play? Gas, food, bait, boats, all those things that we buy. How much money does that account for in the overall revenue of Florida?
I can find that number for you. I know we present it sometimes. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I want to say it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
And in your case, and I'm not picking on you. I'm just
No, it's fine.
You got some big arms, boy. I'm liking you, big old stout guy. You know, in my case, when Tony told us the numbers on the red snapper regulations, said there's a big pie, and everybody gets a part of it. Well, the commercial fishing part of it was 42% of that. A lot.
So that's
42%.
So that's federal regulations that you're getting into. And
You don't do anything about
We, you know, participate in the decision that they come up with, but ultimately we don't have full control over
that. Ours
that.
is 17.
Because in
Recreational fishermen.
Yeah, but the data that they provide to the federal government is only a small portion because Alabama and Louisiana and Mississippi and
Well,
Georgia,
Louisiana just reopened their red snapper
They all
season
have-
because they said they had an overpopulation.
because it's federal, they all have a say.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, and it
Red-
depends on where they are in their quota, whether they reopen or not. So Florida hit its quota for the amount that it's allocated compared to the other states.
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana, my understanding is, did not, and so they still have a little bit left to go out and catch. And the same
I
with
just don't
commercial.
see how it could be so one-sided between the commercial and the recreational. When we're supporting more dollars in the total overall income of the state
And
than
it
the
depends on the
recreational
fishery.
law.
It depends. Some fisheries are, 98% recreational, and other fisheries are much more commercial. Each fishery is a little different. Sometimes they use kind of historical data to come up with that allocation for who gets what percentage, and it gets tweaked. Every federal council meeting, pretty much, they're talking about potential changes to some of those allocations based on new data.
Well, I hope so, cause, I mean, I've been a professional guide for 25 years. I'm on my 5th ticket, and, you know, when you get 2 days a year to go red snapper fishing, it's not really worth it.
Yeah, we could have a whole talk about red snapper. There's a lot going on there, especially recently with.
I don't wanna talk about it, I wanna change it.
There's a lot of folks working on that. It's another one of those things that's a little complicated because of the age of red snapper, how old they can get and how old all the ones out there are. And just to briefly sum up my understanding from.
Well, wouldn't your, slot limit control the age?
Partially, but part of the stock assessments are based on the proportion in each age group. And so if there's no older fish, that weighs more heavily on the stock assessment and is a poorer result because those older fish reproduce so much more than the younger fish do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know,
As far as hatchlings go.
correct number of eggs. And so, you know, right now, a lot of the fish that we're seeing, there's tons of them. They've had super high recruitment in red snapper for the last several years, but all the fish are less than 5 years old. And for a fish that reaches 50 years old, you're still, you know, only that far into gaining
Red
all those
snapper
age
can
classes.
be 50 years old? Really? Wow, that's amazing, I didn't know that.
And so that's part of the issue is that they're trying to look at different ways to assess red snapper because that limitation is basically the model that they're putting it through is
He was
spitting
born
out.
during Nixon times. Anybody remember Nixon?
Yeah, the model's spitting out that fishery is not okay, when really maybe it is, but the model needs to be adjusted to look at it from a different perspective.
It's
And
not
so,
okay in 2021, but it might be okay in 2040 because of the
I'll be
amount of
there.
5-year-old fish.
You're not gonna help me, Derek.
don't look at me.
I'm dead.
But
And
yeah,
I've
like I
got-
said, we could have a whole
I don't
seminar
wanna
on that if we
interrupt
wanted
you
to.
anymore.
It's
You
a,
go
it's a
ahead
lot
with
that
your
goes in.
presentation. I'm sorry.
Let me figure out where I was. And just sometimes
Latitude
fish are
range.
managed differently from the Gulf to the Atlantic. So this is just some maps. You know, it gets a little complex, like I said, about federal waters, state waters, and then other jurisdictions within them. So these are just, you know, federal waters of the Atlantic in purple, Gulf in kind of that greenish color, and then blue is going to be the state waters. Then you get some other jurisdictions come into place. That's Everglades National Park in green, Dry Tortugas in yellow.
Tortugas is state?
So it's in state waters, but national parks and Dry Tortuga, they can have their own regulations that can supersede FWC's regulations. So Everglades National Park has some of its own regulations. A lot of them are the same, but some of them are unique for there. Same with different areas in the Keys, Biscayne National Park. Just recently, had a new management plan they developed, and part of that was working with FWC to come up with stricter regulations for within the national park. So a lot of their minimum sizes went up a little bit for fish, and their bag limits went down. And some species are now regulated that weren't previously, and so you have a lot of these kind of overlapping areas where, you know, folks are working together to figure out how to manage the fish, and either that jurisdiction is shared or is at least, you know, considering the other jurisdictions near or surrounding them when they're trying to make these management decisions. We also have further complications like where this Gulf Atlantic boundary is. So for state waters, for some species, it's all through the Keys. For some other species like grouper, it's up there, kind of north of around the 10,000 Islands area. And so it does get complicated. I know when you're out there, you know, it's hard to remember. Like, did this change to this, or they were talking about it? Did it happen? You know, is that if I cross this, you know,
Go
line?
under this bridge?
Yeah, exactly. So it gets complicated, and I get that. The thing we tell people now is to get something like fish rules on your phone. You can just pull it up right there. It'll tell you exactly where you are, what the regulations are. Folks call us and, you know, expect me to know every regulation just off the top of my head, and I definitely don't. Y'all probably know them better than I do. It's kind of, you know, we work on a topic, we know that really well, and then we move on to another topic.
I get arrested if I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're out there, you gotta be responsible for it, and you gotta be checking. Same with me. If I'm out there, I'll check and see. And
You should know too.
the ones I know, don't worry about it. It's the ones I don't know, you gotta look up. So I mentioned this a little bit, but you know, the federal waters, they've got their own councils, and we've got NOAA overseeing the highly migratory species, as well as the South Atlantic Council. we can, like I mentioned earlier, extend our state regulations sometimes into federal waters, but that's typically only if the species is not managed in federal waters. And also usually if we have a reason to do so. We don't typically do it if there's no benefit to that. So within state waters, though, we have regulatory authority with some exceptions, like in things like national parks, state parks, that they can set some of their own regulations. But a lot of times we work with them to figure out how we have a similar goal. How do we go towards that without kind of fighting each other to do so? And then we have the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is going to coordinate kind of interstate fisheries issues. So fish that are in state waters but travel between Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, up the Atlantic coast. That's basically a commission of states that have agreed to cooperatively manage those fisheries that they kind of share along their coastline. So a lot of working pieces going on, a lot of folks involved, and it, unfortunately, like I said, gets complicated. This is kind of the general process for how the regulatory system works with FWC. Doesn't always follow this exact routine, but this is kind of the general gist of it. We start off with kind of an issue or concern. We hear something from folks, or research tells us that maybe we should look into something a little more. We go out and gather feedback, look at the data we have, and say, is this something we need to be concerned about and look into more, potentially add to what we call our work plan. Each year, Marine Fisheries has a work plan where they list all the items that they are hoping to work on that year. Some of them are 5-year items, so they just get worked on every single year for 5 years until they're complete. Others are quick items, rule consistency kind of things that are very fast and easy. So we'll take that a lot of times to the commissioners at one of our commission meetings, and we will kind of give them a review and discussion, tell them about the fishery, what the issue or concern is, and get their feedback on whether we should pursue any sort of draft rules or change in rules for this fishery. A lot of times we'll take that out to public workshop to get feedback from folks in kind of a more formal way, but we're also reaching out to tackle shops, recreational anglers, guides, commercial wholesalers, things like that, to get feedback from them on what they're seeing, what they think about what should be done about it, things like that. We come up with a draft rule. We recommend that to the commissioners at the next a subsequent commission meeting. Get their feedback. If they kind of like what we're suggesting and it makes sense to them, they agree with it, then it'll move forward. Sometimes that's the end of it. They say no, and it gets dropped until maybe a point in the future. We have usually after that some additional workshop and feedbacks that we take on that item, and then it comes to a final public hearing. This is the last chance for anyone to voice public concern, do public comments, get their say into the commissioners about how they feel about what we're proposing, and then ultimately the commissioners make the final decision on what happens. There are 7 commissioners, governor appointed, and they have a range of backgrounds, but they ultimately are the ones that decide what's going to be done with our Fish and Wildlife in Florida. And then it gets adopted if they approve it at the commission meeting. So that's kind of the general process. Sometimes that varies a little bit. Sometimes we have 2 draft rule hearings, but in general, that's how it goes. It's a very formalized public incorporating process that takes a while. It could be 6 months is pretty fast for rulemaking. A lot of times it's more like 6 months to a year, and on some complicated things, it's multiple years. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but kind of really focusing on maintaining access and fishing opportunities while ensuring sustainability through a regulatory process. Also tailoring these to stakeholder desires, whether that's catching large fish or catching lots of fish or catching a variety of fish. There's different ways that we can adjust regulations to promote those different end results that they'd like to see. And overall, we think that we've done pretty well. Most of the fisheries in the state are doing well. Nearly all of them are meeting or exceeding our management goals. Fairly high stakeholder satisfaction from the feedback that we get. However, you guys can feel free to disagree and let me know. And then we've got a pretty good history of working with the commercial industry to address their concerns as well.
How did they come up with the rules for Goliath grouper?
So the proposal?
Yeah.
So there was a lot that went into that. So it started essentially, we're seeing an increase, Goliath was closed in 1990, and we're seeing an increase in the population over the past 30 years, and it is the Commission's philosophy that if a fish can sustain harvest, then it should be allowed. Kind of, if you close something, you should, when it gets better, reopen it to some extent to stakeholders, if there's the desire to harvest. And so we saw numbers increasing, and in around 2017, I believe, before I was with Marine Fisheries Management, they took it out to public workshops just to say, like, hey, if we did this, how would y'all feel? Brought it to the commission meeting with what they heard from folks, and commissioners said, we're not ready for this, let's hold off. About a year ago, they started mentioning again, like, let's revisit this topic. And so we had a lot of folks, on two sides of this spectrum, essentially. Anglers that are, losing fish to Goliath, losing tackle to Goliath, seeing them and interacting with them much more than they would like to. Not necessarily that want to catch and keep them, at least with the adults, but that don't want them taking their fish. And you have the other side of the spectrum, which would be divers, which are a big stakeholder group for us, bring a lot of money into the state as well. They are, wanting to keep as many Goliath as possible. They are making money off the ecotourism aspect of that.
How are they making money off of the divers if they can't harvest them?
The selling dive
People
trips.
see them?
People travel
Okay,
to Florida
I got you.
to
I'm
stay in a
sorry.
hotel and
That was
dive.
a
They're very
stupid question.
docile, they like to pet them.
That's a
Yeah, you-
stupid question.
They can come up, you can get real close to them. It's a huge fish, and so it's something that's different. You can't really see that anywhere else in the world, where you have maybe 60 to 100 8-foot, 800-pound fish around you in the water.
Does
And
the
so-
predation of other species count for anything?
Does the what?
Predation of other species.
So yes, and that's the main angler's concern, is that you're eating other species. Diet studies have shown that they're on their own. They don't typically take a lot of the target species. They shamefaced crabs is like the biggest thing that they eat. They eat some
Lobster?
They can eat lobster, but it's not a big part of their diet.
Really?
Same with
Huh.
grouper and snapper. It's not a big part of their diet,
Lionfish.
but they're very opportunistic. They'll take kind of anything that's presented in front of them if it's an easy meal. And so when a fish is hooked, that's an easy meal. I'm sure you guys are seeing it with sharks as well now. We hear about Goliath and sharks as kind of the two main things we hear nowadays. And so we're addressing sharks kind of in a different manner because that's a little more complex because there's multiple species and federal management involved. But Goliath, really the goal was not to do kind of either end of this spectrum, not to do what divers want, not to do what anglers want. This is really to go back to our core philosophy of if you close something, when it gets better, you should reopen it if you can. And the way that we came up with, it's still in the works, nothing's finalized yet. It has final public hearing probably in March. But the way that we came up with was to do that, to address a lot of folks' concerns, was to propose a slot limit on the juvenile subadult fish. So it's going to be, the proposal was 20 to 36 inches. We got feedback from commissioners that they wanted to be 24 to 36 inches. But these are going to be the fish that are still inshore, lower levels of mercury, not contributing to the population, so not reproducing. You're not harvesting a reproducing adult. Not something that the divers are as concerned about. They're really not in that area of Florida where the divers are making money off the ecotourism aspect of it. And to make a very limited number, to be kind of conservative about this, because there's just a lot of uncertainty on where exactly in their rebuilding Goliath are. There's not a lot of ideal data to tell us where exactly they are, but we're working on collecting that. We have folks at the Tequesta Lab that are taking genetic samples along with anglers that are helping them. And so, we get kind of two perspectives. Anglers that say there's tons of them everywhere, they're all over, you can't get rid of them fast enough. And then we have divers that say they're not seeing as many as they used to. Their numbers are going down. We just don't
That's what
have
they're gonna say.
That's a lie.
we don't have the science, I would say, to accurately say where probably in the middle it lies.
So they closed the Goliath seasons in 1990,
Correct.
and you guys haven't done any studies on what's happening with them or anything like that?
We have,
Oh,
but
yeah.
when they're most of our data comes from what fish people catch.
Okay.
And so if a fish hasn't been caught and harvested, we don't get the same level of data.
30 years.
Right, and so they've tried to do a stock assessment 3 times on Goliath grouper to see how far they've rebuilt their population, and every time it's been rejected for use in management because it lacks several things, but the main one being harvest data. Stock assessments really are a gauge of how we should adjust fishing pressure based on the status of the stock, and when there's no fishing pressure, you can't really say that. And so unfortunately there is a fair bit of data, but not the data that we typically traditionally need to say where they're at. But we're using some alternative methods, that genetics component. If you get enough genetic samples, you can look at how diverse they are genetically, and through some method I don't really understand, they can say, based on these, 5,000 samples, we can predict that there are 30,000 Goliath grouper or whatever it would be, because of how related they are to each other. And so they're working on that, but it's hard to say without certain key pieces of data. Another big one is how old they get. The oldest one's 37, but like with red snapper, if they live to 50 or 70, that is a very different situation, and that adjusts how those models spit out whether the status of the stock. And yeah, another kind of like red snapper, you can do a whole lot of discussion on that. I'm happy to talk about it, more afterwards, of course. But it's not done yet. It's still coming to final public hearing, likely in March. There will be some tweaks added to it based on commissioner request at the last commission meeting in October. And we'll be taking feedback on those when we put out the updated proposal. But I'm happy to take feedback on anything Goliath related or any other fisheries related while I'm here tonight.
And then once we finish, we'll go back to the questions of these guys. So.
Okay. Yeah, I can speed through here this last bit. Oh yeah, we're getting low on time. Okay. So I won't get into this too much, but this is kind of how we assess the stock. You take all this data, putting in with these kind of metrics and goals that you use to assess it. And then sometimes you have different things that you're looking at, like quotas and allocations or catch limits, or total harvest, things like that can get a little complicated, but is typically more federally used than state. You know about all these, the ways we can manage our kind of traditional tools for management. So this would be kind of things like bags, vessel limits, size restrictions, seasonal closures, gear restrictions, and then spatial management, where these regulations take place. We also have a lot of non-regulatory stuff that can help fisheries, things like outreach and education for how to best practices when fishing to ensure that the fish are releasing is surviving. Things like filling data gaps. If we need information on a certain thing, we can provide funding to do that. Look at that question. Citizen science is becoming a real big thing in lots of different fields of research, and we're definitely utilizing that as best we can for fisheries data. And then things that pretty much everyone can get behind that restore habitat or create habitat, like artificial reef development, putting in living shorelines, coral reef enhancement, things like that. South Florida, I mentioned Biscayne National Park. It's probably not as of interest to y'all, but this is kind of a South Florida presentation.
We go down there.
And so if you go down there, we've had some changes recently with there. We've also newly done the state reef fish survey. This is an additional survey to what we typically do, that's going to look at more of the reef fish in Florida and provide more data for those fisheries beyond what we were getting before. We're dealing with stony coral tissue loss disease on our coral reefs down here. It's a major issue. Lots and lots of people and lots of money are being put towards this effort to save our reef, essentially. And there's been some exciting updates with as far as finding things that can prevent it or cure it recently, but it's going to be a long time before we see, if ever, reefs like they used to be. But at the same time, how can we preserve our fisheries if we are losing corals? So that's been some topics we've been discussing. Everglades restoration, like we got into a little bit earlier, is a big one, dealing with Lake Okeechobee, water releases, water movement, water timing. And then we're going to have lots more issues as we move forward, as people continue to move to Florida, and things continue to get developed. And so we're hoping to try and provide kind of, futuristic fisheries perspective on what those sort of impacts will be, and kind of predict them and hopefully be prepared for them from a management perspective, not just fisheries management, but infrastructure, water, flow, and all the other parts that play into it. And kind of looking into some innovative ideas too for we're always open to different options for how do we do things, whether that's looking at smaller scale, regional, things like stock enhancement through aquaculture, staggering seasons, maybe you have a season one year but not the next, different options from different perspectives, new ways of thinking. We're always open to those. So if you have any, feel free to let me know. And I think we're getting close here. Didn't update this slide, but next meeting is actually going to be in December. You can always provide comments on saltwater comments portion of our website. I've got a little card here, but if you're watching online, it's at myfwc.com/saltwater comments, or you can email me. He's going to send out my email, I think, in a bit. Participate in public workshops are a good one, and then provide public comment for the commissioners at commission meetings, because they do take that to heart. And then stay informed. We've got our website, we've got some apps, and we've got newsletters, a fair amount of newsletters that go out that keep you up to date with all things involving FWC, fisheries management, marine fisheries. So with that, I'm going to take any questions. Yep.
All right,
And
so
thank you.
before we go to questions, because we're running a little late,
Yeah,
we're
we're
going to
running
drop
out of
off the Facebook. But I want to say a couple things real quick, and then we'll continue with Derek. So you guys have some questions. But out there in Facebook land, if you guys want to send in questions directly to Derek, you can on his website at derek.cox, DEREK.COX at myfwc.com.
There's no way they gonna remember that.
Well, you can play it over and they will watch you again. Anyways, and you just go to myfwc.com, and I'm sure you can find Derek on there as well. But we appreciate that and you coming out. So I want to say thanks again to
Thanks,
Derek.
Derek.
And
Thank
a
you,
couple of quick things. Come in and see us at SunDance. We've got some new arrivals. We're doing our pontoons, our barlettas. We've got some nice ones that just came in this week. We still have production slots for our Everglades.
Did you sell all the Parkers at Fort Lauderdale?
Not all of them. We've got a few
Yeah.
Parkers left, and also Regal. So, we are limited, but we've got production slots that we're working with, and we've got a great crew of salesmen here and service and storage. So come out and see us and say hello. I appreciate everyone.